Okay. Good morning. I'm Chris van Goethem. I'm a stage manager and teacher at RITS, and I work for the Expertise Center of Technical Theatre, and in that function I was also project leader of the Canon project. The Canon project is the project about the history of technical theatre. We work together with 9 partners from different countries, mostly school and the Theatre Institute in Prague, and we worked together with students and teachers from these different entities. Our goal was to increase the awareness and understanding of the history of technical theatre in Europe from multiple purposes. The importance of that, the words that are important here are technical theatre, because we're really looking into the technical part of the history, way more than the artistic part. And the second thing that is very important is the multiple perspectives. In the way, if we look at history from different points of view, from different countries, from different fields, we see different things. And by bringing all these things together, we create a way richer history. That's one of the reasons why we had as well technical theatre schools, scenography schools, and architectural schools. What did we do with all these students? We researched a lot. We worked online because we were in the middle of the Corona crisis. We did workshops with students face-to-face in the different countries, and we did workshops with teachers. Just to be clear, what exactly is technical theatre history and heritage? Mostly when we talk about heritage and history, we talk about things that are long ago, 100, 200 years. But the Revox recorder you see here on the screen is something that was actually in use 20 years ago. And some of my students now ask if the picture shouldn't be upside down because the wheels are on the upside. So this is the speed we go in our history. We're looking at documentation of equipment, of buildings, of people, of organizations, and especially their use. How were they used in the environment of a real-life theater or event situation? So basically we're talking about everything that shaped our work, which also means that we're looking back at our own history, at our own identity as technicians, as scenographers, as architects. And we're talking about very recent history. The project had 5 outcomes. We created 100 stories, we created teaching tools, methodology, a timeline, and a network. I'll go a little bit more in detail on that. We created 100 stories. The idea was to describe the history in a modular way so it can be used in different forms. We created kind of a matrix with 10 time frames, with 10 different fields. And so you can use them as well to talk about a specific time frame or to talk about a specific field. The stories were developed by the students and then edited by the teachers and put online, and they're also available in print. The tools are all kind of stuff that you can use while teaching. That was about different drawings to understand technology better. We translated the Sabatini with new drawings in it to understand better what it is. It's our interpretation of the text. We created videos of the Disomi dialogues, and we created a game, for example, Anno Teatri, which is a game you can play in a classroom but also in a bar about the history of technical theatre. To give you one example of the tools, this is the 3D drawings of Sabatini, where you really can see step by step how he imagined an ideal theatre in building. The methodologies are mainly about the way we teach. Traditionally, history is about dates and names, and we try to avoid that. So we try to find all kind of different ways based on the experience of all the teachers that were part of the project and a lot of people that joined us in this project on different ways of teaching, mostly practical ways of teaching. One example you can see here is how to make a Lindebach projector. This gives you a way better understanding about the consequences of using that than just reading it in a book. And we adapt in this way also to our core audience, with most students in our fields are practice-based. They really want to work with their hands more than read hundreds and hundreds of pages. The result is kind of a practical inspiration guide, a guide that you can use as an inspiration, not kind of something that you have to use it in the way that we use it, but that can help you in improving or changing your way of teaching. The next outcome is the timeline, which ended up in a database where we wanted to gather information, but especially visualizing it, because our students are very visual oriented, and which is a way for us to spread the news. I'll go further in detail in the second part of this presentation. The essence for us was that it's a collaborating tool and that it safeguards information that probably otherwise would be lost. And the last part, of course, it's you, our network, which helps us to create awareness. So we gathered kind of people around us that are interested in this team, and we try to connect them because they're often in small little islands. We try to connect them together. We're reaching out to other initiatives that are working on the same team, and we hope that our collaborative tool will be kind of the glue to bring this network together. That's a little bit of context about the whole of the project. Let's have a look now at the Canonbase, because that's what I wanted to talk about today. One of my life guiding lines is everything is connected to everything, which doesn't always help to create clearness in the chaos, but we try to develop a tool for that. The Canonbase is a collaborative database, which means that everybody that has a login can access the everybody can access the information, but if you have a login, you can also add things, you can change things, you can work on it, and in that way, different people can work together on the same knowledge base. The essence was to structure and visualize the information. We'll see that more in detail later. Because there is so much information and it's so spread and it's so written in different ways that it's very hard to make a comparison. And we tried to make this database in a way that you really can see the information instead of having to read it. It's open data and it's open source. It's a part of a European project, and all these projects are open source, which means you can use all our information, you can query them, you can do whatever you want with them. But let me give a concrete example. In a month, we go to the PQ, the Prague Quadrennial. Imagine I want to document that. The information is spread everywhere. Every country that participated between the 60s and now has written in their magazines. They've written about their experience there, but also what they've seen from all the others. There is pictures everywhere. There is all kind of stories of people that kind of tell about what they have done there. There is archives in all countries, and probably some of the exhibits that originally were in PQ are archived somewhere, and there is books written about it. There is the catalog, but there is also other people that have written about scenography and so on. All this information is on one way about people and about organizations and of course about the scenography itself. So if we could connect all these separate little parts of information and we could bring them together in one structured whole that is also visible, then we would kind of strengthen the amount of information. We would make it better. We would make it deeper, and we would get a better overview. And we would also look at PQ from all different kinds of directions, which makes it more interesting. A similar example is if we talk about theaters. There is a lot of different sources. They're spread everywhere. There is no place where you can find all the information together. And moreover, not all the information is the same. Because if I make a database for theaters, in the sense for a booking agent, for example, that will be a complete different type of information than if I make a database for touring for technicians or a historical database. But parts of these informations overlap. So how did we work to create this database? We are fond of research by doing. And the way we started experimenting, we already started experimenting before the project. There was 2 previous versions where we tried out all kind of stuff. And then in the project, we started bit by bit experimenting, a lot of failing. Failing was often a fantastic way to find better solutions. Experimenting again, testing with students, adopting it, and bit by bit we grow to more or less a stable information base. Important for that is that we kept the bird's eye. We were not only looking at this project, we were looking always like, what else could we do that we don't want to do now, but that should be possible with our solution. The technical solution is based on Wikidata software, so it's the same software as Wikidata is running on. It's open link data, so it's a format that is reusable in all kind of other systems based on triplets and qualifiers. We build a layer on top, a kind of a front end, with all kind of extra functionalities that made it easier for people to work on, that made it easier to visualize the information, and so on. The reason we didn't work directly in Wikidata is because we only had 3 years' time, and we want to be independent from the Wikidata community to be able to experiment. On the other hand, we always kept in the back of our mind that everything we did should be transferable, and it should be possible to bring it back to the main Wikidata source so it lives on, let's say, forever. One of the extra technical solutions we built was we embedded wiki pages. Normally, a wiki page is monolingual, but what we did is we created wiki pages that are embedded in a record in our database, which makes it possible to create some text on top of the data structure, but which also makes it possible to make them multilingual. So if your language changes and there is a text written in your language, you will see that text directly in your language. To structure the information a bit, we created kind of a matrix structure with, on one hand, the fields, lighting or sound or stage mechanics, general history, whatever. And on the other hand, the type of information. Are we talking about the person? Are we talking about an event, a manufacturer, and so on? So you create kind of a matrix that roughly brings your information together and that helps you to find the information you need. And on top of that, we have some overview pages, for example, for a country, for a city, and so on. I'll show some examples later on. Another thing we did is we started with the Wikidata properties, but often they were not readable enough for an average user. So what we did is we adapted them to our field, but we kept in mind that we can reverse them to the Wikidata properties. So that makes it easier for people to add information, to search information, and so on. But we always looked at this transfer back. Another thing we did is we worked a lot with inverse labels. In a typical open data structure, if you connect one thing to something else, you can't see in this other thing that it's connected to this previous thing. And that it helps a lot if you want to read it as a final product and not just as a data collection. It's very important to use these inverse labels to see if somebody is the author of a book, that you can see on the side of the author also which books he has written. We tackled some issues that are rather specific for the type of information we were looking for. One of them is the issue of mass-produced equipment. Traditionally, in a museum collection, for example, you will have a unique object. And this unique object is described in detail, but it doesn't refer to a common thing. What we do, because we're describing a lot of equipment that is mass-produced, we first describe the type of it, and then different people from different collections can link their unique pieces to that without having to document them completely. The ideal situation is that somebody brings in a new type of equipment, documents that, and then others can reuse his information to connect their equipment to, and then they can describe what is specific to their unique piece. For example, damage, for example, adaptations that are made, and so on. Another issue that we encountered is that every country is organized differently, but we had to find a way to kind of structure these countries with all their different structures. And I must say, if you live in Belgium, that's a very good example, because we have a very complex structure. So we started with testing with that, and we find out if it works for us, it works for everyone. So we organized the geographical information in continents, countries, regions, provinces, cities, and city parts, with some annotation for every country what that would mean for that specific country. But that was the only way to be able to visualize later on this information in kind of tree structures. So that's another thing. And then a third element is that there we needed to have a switch. To be able to make the timelines, the dates had to be always in a property. Now in Wikidata I have a specific property, significant event, where the date is kind of a qualifier, but that made it very complex to make the timeline. So we switched that around. We have a significant event date, and we connect what happened to that as a qualifier. Okay. Just an example of some equipment. You have all the basic information. This is, well, it's not, the picture and the spotlight is not connected, but you know that this type has a unique piece that is in the TIAT collection, for example. It's in the field of lighting and projection. It's information about equipment, and the type of equipment is a PC spotlight. It's manufactured by ADB, and it's mentioned in all these different sources, which in this case are often catalogs, manuals, specifications, that type of thing. So if somebody else would add a second spotlight of the same type, they don't have to look at all this information. They don't have to organize the whole thing. They can just link it to that. On the other hand, if they would have new information, they could add it to the type, which also would enrich my information about my collection. So in that sense, it helps a lot in collaborating with people to get a clear structure on how we deal with that. Okay. Of course, sometimes we got some very odd issues. One nice example is the city of Ostend that has a theater. The first casino. At one moment that theater is taken down, is moved to the Netherlands and is built up there again. And then the next step is that they take it down again there, and they move it again and they build it up in Nord-Pas-de-Calais in France. And then you get all kind of questions, but is this the same theater? Is this do we name it the same? Is it the same issue? Do we link to it, and do we say it's a new theater, and so on? And that's a general thing we see, is that often information is in a written format, in sentences and so on. And that doesn't force you to be exact. You can go over this type of things, or you can just describe it. But by putting it in a data structure, it helps you a lot in being very accurate and being sure that it's understood by everyone in the world. Another issue that is quite big is that we often name theaters to the theater company that is in there, but basically they're two different entities. Another thing is that there is multiple spaces in the same building that have different names. So these are the type of issues we got when we were building up this database, and for most of them we found a solution. We have a draft version of a manual where we explain all these things, but that will take some time because it grew a little bit bigger than what we expected. Important in this type of databases is what we call a controlled language, which means that, well, in our sector we have a very bad habit in giving the same name to different things and using different names for the same thing. So that makes things a little bit complex. And there we started from the idea we're not really using terms, but we're using concepts. And a concept is the same always. To that we linked a standard terminology, and there I have to thank very much Jerome Makelberg that helped us in importing digital theater words, which gave us a basis to work on in 28 different languages, if I remember well. And we started to restructure that in kind of a tree structure like you see here. That makes it possible not only to find your way in there, but also if you're not sure about something, you can just go one level higher. So if I don't know what type of dimmer it is, I can just go one level higher and still define it as a dimmer. One of the things that we found out that even if we have controlled languages about the most weird things, there is no controlled language in our field. That's something that is missing, which also makes it very difficult, for example, to find technical equipment back in a museum collection, because it's called a lighting fixture or something like that. And because it's not defined, because it's between 3,000 other lighting fixtures that you're using in your home, it's very hard to find. So that's one of the things we worked on quite a lot, and we hope in the future that we will develop this language further and make it also available for museums to get more detail, which also would mean that we would find back the stuff that we want to find in all these different collections, because basically nobody knows what's in the storage pages of most collections at the moment. So it's a standardized terminology, it's multilingual in tree structures, and we gather information in the first place from digital theater words, but then we started adding based on words we found in magazines, in glossaries, in dictionaries, in books, in catalogs of equipment. So we tried to enrich this in a way that it really reflects the language that was used through the whole history of technical theater. Okay. An important element is visualizations, and I can give you a very concrete example. If you're researching a specific theater and then you link that to an architect, you would do that and everybody would say, yes, that's okay. And then you make a timeline out of that, and then you certainly see that the architect died before the building was built. That's a thing that you only see when you're looking at the time frame. It's very hard to figure that out within a text. So that's one of the things that helps. Or you figure out, for example, that a theater is in a small community that is part of a larger city, which you wouldn't realize if you look just at the names, because you don't know the geography of the country. But by putting it on a map, it becomes very visible. And the idea is that you should always be able to bring all the information in one page. Of course, at one moment it becomes a little bit unreadable, but that's basically the idea we had. So this is an example of a time frame of a series of theaters that are selected in the larger database. So that gives you directly an idea what was happening in that time frame or in that city or whatever. We can visualize the same theaters and much more, because this is only a selection, into a map. And one of the nice things is the time frames and the maps are generated automatically. This means if you add one theater and you look at the time frame, the theater will be also visible in the time frame, and the theater will also be visible on the maps, and the theater will be visible on the tree structure based on the geography. So that means that the moment you add things, you also see all the visualizations changing, which is on one hand a good thing, which also on the other hand caused us a lot of trouble, because it's a lot of calculations for a computer. But I'll get to that later. So these are based on types of information, but as well you could look at a city, and there you would see the map of the city, you would see the time frame of what happened in the city, which would also include people that live there, which would also include events that are there. So there you just say everything that happened in the city comes together. You will see lists of theaters, you will see which collections are there. So in the future, probably this is a good travel planner for theater technical fanatics. You will see who lived there. You will see all the information that we have that is connected to this city. For equipment, you can see on the one hand a tree structure, but you can also see, for example, when was the first use date? When did we first use a Lindenbach projector or a Revox recorder or so on? So there again, if there is enough information in there, we will be able to see who is the first. And you could basically, based on the timeline, write the history of a specific part of equipment or a specific field or whatever you want to have. We try to go for a one-fits-all approach. The idea was if we would add new functionalities, all the other or we would add a new field, all the other functionalities would work. If we would add a new property, all the functionalities would work. After a time, the data collection got so big that we started to have, because the queries are quite complex to do that, because it has to figure out which are all the possible inverse labels, for example. So the queries timed out, and we started to get kind of unexpected results. So we had to take a step back there, but I'm quite sure we will solve that in the future. So now we defined kind of different types of pages that will reflect the information that we put in there. Another thing is, if you look at the database, it doesn't look very well. Our core was to get it working, and our core was to get it useful. We do understand that we need to work on the layout and to improve a lot of things. And a third thing is that it's very hard if you work with a large group of people to get consequent input, because people make other interpretations and that type of thing. That's one of the things we encountered, which needs a lot of checking, but which also needs some technical solutions that we haven't finished yet, like a drop-down list and that type of thing. Excuse me. So that's a little bit about the concept of the database, and you can have a look online how it works. Let me talk a little bit about the way we gathered information. Of course, we started in the experiments in typing everything, but if you have a lot of information, and we do have a lot of information, it's a long process to type everything. So, first of all, what is all information? We try to limit ourselves to what's within our field, which is the technical theater, and the architecture that is around that. What we collect is the minimum information we need to visualize, or to structure, or to organize. We look at information that is in danger. If we think like, oh, this website is going to disappear, which happens. I found websites with the latest update in 2002, created by, at that time already, Professor Emeritus, can't remember his name. And you can imagine that at one moment somebody forgets to pay the website, or somebody shuts down the server, or somebody thinks, well, nobody's taking care of this anymore, and it would disappear. So at that moment we would try to gather it. We're looking for information that is not online, or at least not structured online. And there is a lot of historical books from before 1920s. They're available, but they're not structured. So we're looking to take some information that we can tag them, we can organize them, and so on. We look at information that is not in a data format, because then you can't read it or you can't make maps from that and what else. And of course, all the information that comes from our own research. For all the other information, we refer to what's available online. There's very good other websites that have very good information. If it's not needed for the core functioning of our database, we just refer to it. It makes way more sense to refer for the architecture to a specialized architect database than to try to import everything, and then if they update something, you're lost again. So where possible, we refer to other information. We refer standard to everything which is in Wikidata. We refer to national heritage sites. We refer to existing sites about specific equipment, and so on and so on. Okay. One of the things is that a lot of the information, we are not sure if it will survive. What we do there is we refer to a source, but in the background we make a backup copy. This means that it's not visible for the public, but if ever this source would disappear, we still have a backup copy that we can use for research purposes. So I said already that it's a bit hard to type all this information, and at that moment, once we got a rough structure, we started what we called harvesting information. There is a huge amount of information online, for example, about theaters. The 9,734 theaters that are there are already outdated because we're now at 11,000. You can imagine that we didn't type them all. So what we did is we used existing lists of theaters that were made for all different types of purposes, going from a touring list of someone, national lists of organizations, whatever. We tried to bring them all together. And all these lists linked to different types of information. And by bringing everything together, you get a way richer information base. We used, as I said before, digital theater words as a start, which was a fantastic thing to do because that gave us the core of our controlled language. We are looking at magazines. I got from different countries, I got their magazines. We imported them all. So one, they are safe now. Secondly, we can tag them and link them to all the subjects. I go back for a second to the PQ. In every country in their magazine, they have written something about PQ. So bringing everything together gives you a way richer image from a way more different points of view. And probably you will find always some information in your language to bring that together. But as well, articles about new equipment. So you bring all these things together, and we try to do that in bulk. One of the things that we are working on now is to taking out of these magazines also publicity, and that has a very strange reason. If a company makes a catalog, they never put a date on it. And the reason they don't put a date on it is because next year their equipment would be old-fashioned, because it's last year's equipment. That makes it very difficult to give exact dates of equipment when it has the first use and when it ended. While in magazines, the magazine is dated and the publicity will be there the moment the equipment is launched. So by tagging all the publicity, we get a way better image of where a certain type of equipment is launched in different countries at what time. We're trying to get pictures together. I have some people that promised me that they have 100,000 pictures they made over the years, and they will select information that we're allowed to use. And of course, we're looking into all kind of online sources. So how does this harvesting process works? We try to retrieve information. That can be people that give us lists that we can download. In some cases, we can scrap websites, in the sense that with some software, we retrieve the information and it's in kind of a rough data version. We try to get lists from offline databases. In some cases, scans of books that we kind of transfer into lists. And then we start cleaning all this information. We bring it all together in mainly Excel files because they're very flexible to work with. We split it out in data that we can connect to the properties, and then we get a list that is clear enough to import into our database, which means that you, instead of typing 1,500 theaters, you can just import 1,500 theaters, which works way faster. Once the information is imported, the big work starts, because you have to verify and check. Is there any doubles? Because it's quite possible the theater is already in the database, but it didn't recognize it's the same theater. So you have to check for doubles. You have to check for wrong links. There is a Hoboken in the US, but there is also a Hoboken in Antwerp. There is a good chance that the software didn't understand which Hoboken that was. We're looking for impossibilities, so we go through this list and check it one by one to see if it has the right information. And we have some tools for that. We have predefined queries so we can check all our information. And now most of the time we're researching for additional information. So in the sense that often we ask people that are from that neighborhood or that know the list to see if they have more information about that, and then it becomes richer. I made it a good habit if I go to a city and I have some time, I research the theaters of that city, and then it enriches the information. So that gives me a purpose and gives me a limited amount of work, because if I had to do all Belgium at the same time, that would be rather a problem, and I'm not even living in France, which has way more theaters. So that's one way of working on that. Another way is that we work is if we talk about information that comes from sources, we try to annotate. We have a lot of sources in there, but it doesn't make sense to have a huge library if you don't know where to look for. And sometimes that gives you odd situations. I found a book of about 2,000 pages about air conditioning. I had no clue why it picked up on my search, but I went looking, and in this book there is like one little chapter about air conditioning for theaters, and in this chapter there is 2 pages about air conditioning for gas lighting. The reason I got to this book is by making a typo, and the OCR wasn't perfect, so I found this book. If I wouldn't annotate that, nobody else would find that back. By annotating them, they know where to look, and also in the book what the exact subjects are that are available in this book. When reading sources, often you also will create new items, and you will add information to this item. By using the inverse labels, that also means that the left part is from a book that is annotated, and it also will show at the subject, okay, these are the sources that are available for this specific subject, in this case a theater. And of course there is a lot of information that comes from our research. It's when the students were working on creating these 100 stories, they often found a lot of information, and that information again was imported into the Canonbase, which makes again your information richer, but which also gives you the possibility when you read a story and you want to go deeper into it, it refers directly to all the sources that were used, and it will also send you to all the items that were used in a story. So in that way, you read a story, but if you want to get deeper, you can go further into that. One of the little side projects we have is old theater words. And old theater words are basically words or terms or concepts that were used in the past. And this is quite a nice example in the sense that one of the projects we're doing in the Expertise Center of Technical Theatre is a museum tour for next summer in the City Theatre in Bruges, based on 4 people that worked there. And one of the people that worked there were, one of the people that are used in these stories are ushers, in French, ouvreuse, and we started to look at how did this occupation was described in historical dictionaries. And we get kind of a long list, which also means that based on these dictionaries, you can kind of define what changed in this occupation and how this, what was the perception of that occupation in the past. To give you one idea, it says, there is a dictionary that says under the term untrust or the don't trust, look at ushers. So in that time, probably you can read a little bit between the lines that there was some stuff going on there. So that's one of the elements that is part in there. The last thing I would like to talk about is the issues we had with existing data collections and websites. To my big surprise, theater buildings are very badly documented, especially recent ones. Most of the time on their website, you hardly find the architect or the year the theater was built. And then we're not talking about all the other things that could be documented. So that's a real issue. And what's worse is all these websites are dynamic, which basically means they're created the moment you're looking at them. So the chance that the information you found will be there in 6 months' time is rather small. So that makes it one of the very complex things for theaters and for theater companies to find out. Because of course this information is not useful for them anymore the moment the production has passed. What we hardly find is technical pictures, stage pictures, everything which is backstage is very badly documented. In most cases, if you want to find a spotlight and you have luck, there is a group picture of the actors, and then somewhere in the back you see a spotlight, and you can find that back in that way. But it's never tagged, it's never documented. So that's one of the elements. I think all our theaters and theater companies could do a little bit of effort to get some more information online about their own history. With online collections, one of the things we see is that often they use text-based descriptions, which makes it very hard to find them back. Often their data structure is very confusing, and they have no URIs, in the sense not a link where you know that it's sustainable for the long run. That makes it they are very hard to query, because for most collections it's just an object, and they collect objects. But it's not refined, and you can't link to them. So that makes it very difficult, and I think that's one of the things we need to tackle in the future, because that's going to be the problem is only going to get bigger. As I said, for technical equipment, often it's not dated, and till the year 2000 we had a lot of catalogs and stuff like that, but more and more the information is only available online. So the moment something goes out of production, all the information disappears. And that's one of the things we desperately need to work on. And I hope we can work there together with all the manufacturers to get kind of in bulk the information they have. There is a lot of information at risk. As well, physical collections, because collectors are getting older, well, we all are getting older. And what's more is more and more museums have very strict rules, and they have to get rid of equipment that doesn't fit exactly into their collection profile. So that means that even museums destroy a lot of equipment that for us is the core of what we are researching. Digital and analog information is also at risk in the sense that websites disappear, archives disappear, libraries disappear. And that's basically something I think we should work on in the future. So how could this future look like? One of the things we want to do is to make some improvements in what was generated by the Canon project. This is, for example, about making a more universal taxonomy. We're working on that further and further. We want to extend our network, so we hope that all of you will join us in this effort, probably only doing something you wanted to do anyway, because that's, I think, what the ideal situation would be, is that you do what you have to do anyway, but you enrich at the same time the information that can be used by others, and then we all get a step forward. And we want to improve the interface and the layout, and probably make some additions. So, for example, if somebody imports their collection, they can also embed that part into their own website. That will be one of the options we're considering right now. By extending our network, we also want to work more and more by crowdsourcing. For example, I have very little information about theaters in Africa. It's very hard to research for us because it's a lot of language we don't understand and so on. It would help if you would get communities all over the work, that would help us to import this information about their town, their region, their country. We hope to get more magazines, and ideally people that have worked on the magazine would also tag them in the way that it's way easier. It's rather hard to tag information in a language that you don't really understand that full. So that would help to get more languages and more magazines in that. We hope that people will bring their collection together. It's also an offer because we do have the software solution. And they can use that and focus on the documenting. They can reuse the information of other people, and they don't need to invest in anything except in the time of documenting it. We want to improve the collaboration tools, which means that we want to add markers for missing information in the database, making the tracking of changes better, and probably create some discussion tools so people that are working on the same subject could discuss together in this database with a link directly to the subject they're talking about. And the next step is that there is a lot of equipment that need to be documented in one way or another. We hope to do a new project which has part of a focus on documenting in the sense of 3D scanning, photometry, different ways of representing, so not just a picture but something that you can turn around or where you can look through, that type of thing. We hope to do something on georeferencing, which is basically historical maps that are overlays of modern maps, and in that sense you can see how a city looked like at the moment the theater was built. And we hope to engage people in this collaborative research. So we're really wanting to open up what we have to other research groups and collections. We're working on a manual. We're also working in pre-formatted forms that make it easier to import the basic information. And we're looking into developing some training for people to get their way in the database. We also want to work together with other users. In the sense, I said earlier, you have these lists of theaters that are used for bookers, that are used for technicians, that are used for heritage. Ideally, we would work together and link all these things together, so we get always updated information. And that also means that we know when changes have happened. So that's one of the ideas we have. Now, if you take so much work in doing that, you have to be sure that your information also is safe. So we link to Wikidata, and we're also more and more linking to collection methodologies to ensure that other people can reuse our information in an easy way. The fact that we work with open data will probably help, and the fact that we are working on this controlled vocabulary, we hope that it will spread over other collections also. So how could we collaborate? An example, add your own collection, help us annotate your magazines, your sources, your theses, whatever. That's another thing, is there is so much theses on shelves that have enormous interesting information on them, and nobody ever finds them. So if you have a good thesis on the subject, we import it, we annotate it, and other people can reuse the year of work you spent to write that. Help us to check the information in your region, in your area of expertise, give us feedback, and we hope that you use our database for research. So it's kind of an open call, and if you're interested, feel free to contact us. You get all the information here, and then we can have a look on how we work together in the future. Thank you very much.